Final Fantasy VII needs no introduction. Rebirth is the second of this three-part trilogy that Square-Enix created as a response to all the fan requests for a Final Fantasy VII remake. I wasn't impressed by the 2020 Final Fantasy VII remake or Final Fantasy XVI, so this review you're watching comes from the point of view of someone who hasn't been a fan of Square-Enix's recent AAA offerings. You have no idea how excited I am to say that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a big, huge step in the right direction, not only for this new trilogy, but the Final Fantasy series itself. As someone who grew up playing Final Fantasy VI through 9, I've been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Final Fantasy is back! This trilogy consists of 3 new entries in the Final Fantasy VII franchise, 2 which came out, 1 which is planned for release in 2026. They're presented in form of pseudo-remakes, but they're not real remakes in the traditional sense. And that's all I'm gonna spoil up front before telling you to stop watching this video if you didn't play the original 97 Final Fantasy VII or 7 Remake yet. Rebirth deals with the aftermath of that game's ending. Everything from here on will spoil the game. This might be a bit confusing, but every time I say remake in this review, I'm gonna be referring to the first part of this re-trilogy, if you will. This is my review of one of the best games Square-Enix has released in the last 2 decades. I'm not going to explain any terms and names that you get introduced to via remake, so here's a brief overview of the initial plot setup. The story picks up not long after the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Cloud, Tifa, Barret, and Aerith leave Midgar in pursuit of Sephiroth, and they're officially joined by Red 13, a talking animal they helped out of the laboratory of Professor Hojo, the cold-hearted mastermind behind Shinra's biological research and development. When the game starts, you don't actually begin playing as Cloud or the others. You play as Zack Fair, who used to be a soldier like Cloud and Sephiroth. It's a starting set piece which is meant to be confusing, showing Zack, who was supposed to be long dead, rescuing Cloud and Aerith from Shinra. The two also seem to be hanging by a thread, not even conscious. It cuts to the group who we know better already in the state of calm, where Cloud is telling the gang everything he remembers about his last mission with Sephiroth. Back when he was still just a soldier and the silver-haired legend himself wasn't plotting to doom humanity. In the original you have to reach calm yourself and trigger this flashback by going to the inn. This change is honestly for the better. It allows for the entire flashback session to function as a tutorial and refresh you to the basic controls and flow of the game. Shinra has put a bounty behind each of the Avalanche members, with a far greater bounty behind the Cetra Lady herself. They get barely a night's rest in this meltdown of calm before Shinra troops rain down upon it in search of the wounded group. With no intention of being caught or causing trouble for the innocents in town, the group is led to a secret exit, after which they're welcomed by the vast greenery of the grasslands, suggesting the dying planet is still hanging on, if barely, in spite of the mega corporation's excessive macro extraction. With a big road full of discovery, some hidden Avalanche supporters, some places that just don't want anything to do with the crisis, and some which have very different beliefs about the state of things, the gang begins their biggest journey yet, using the unspoken guidance of the large group of men robed in black. Soldier candidates who became victims of strong macro poisoning, who seem instinctively aware of where Sephiroth might be, often mumbling something about a reunion.
母に会いに行く。待て待てってセフィロス。
The main story feels, more than ever, almost like a serious attempt at retelling the exact same plot as the original, but with a grander scale. You go through the same destinations and the story events are mostly the same. Changes made to the narrative work in service of giving important NPCs more personality and believable motivations, and fleshing out through a proper cutscene and set pieces what used to be poorly translated dialogue exchanges that might not have aged the best. There is an underlying new plot thread happening deep underneath all of this familiar story, and the closer you get to the end, the more it begins to expose its flaws. Not all of it is going to make people happy. If anything, I've seen way too many people criticize this a lot towards the end of the game. I'll just say there are some really interesting ideas here beneath all the frankly stupid Arbiters of Fate nonsense they added since the first episode of this trilogy. I didn't have high expectations for the writing in this game. I think Square-Enix AAA teams have the tendency to get super pretentious over the ridiculous game narratives. My dissing of Square-Enix is no secret if you've been watching my videos prior to this. Rebirth accomplished the impossible task against all odds, and I was thoroughly satisfied with the story being told. I think all of that can be attributed to how well the main characters are written now. See, I didn't care for the characters themselves in the original game. I liked Vincent because he looked cool, but that was it. You get the best versions of each of the playable characters in 7 Rebirth. With the main cast being bigger in this second iteration, this game wastes much less of your time with the boring remake exclusive NPCs. Now those guys don't overstay their welcome. Well, most of them don't. And every new cutscene interaction exists for the sake of building a very organic development of the relationship between Cloud and the others. Underdeveloped characters like Yuffie and Keiichi get explored so much more compared to the original, even the two of them are likable now. What doesn't get fleshed out in the side quests and main story bits is provided to you in form of a relationship mechanic. Every time you reach a new important town, the party will spread around to do their own thing, and you can talk to them individually and pick between a few choices of response. Kind of like Persona social links, but in a bite-sized format. Your choices will change your relationship, which has common implications and will wait on a certain event in one of the last chapters. But the real reward here is finding out more about each of them. Side quests will also involve specific characters of the party more than others, revealing even more about their personalities and backstories, and that even more points to your relationship levels. Basically, in Rebirth, if you don't like a character, it's not because they're not written well, it's because you just don't vibe with the kind of people they are, and that's totally fine. Before you ask, yes, you can still score a date with Barrett or Red 13.
似合ってるね。
ああ、お揃いだ。
次はおじいちゃんの花飾りを作る。
Comic relief and weirdness is still prevalent, as it should, since, as Final Fantasy XVI showed us, you need that kind of levity in a Final Fantasy game if you don't want to make players zone out from the non-stop moodiness. That said, sometimes they go overboard with the levity. There definitely are times when it feels like you've been through some fever dream or a scene that doesn't add anything of value to the characters. Some of it is based on the original, sure, but let's face it, they do it because they think breaking character is funny or a scene might go viral on social media. This company is no stranger to this. Final Fantasy XIV does it all the time. It's also just a very common trope in anime comedic writing, especially filler episodes. But that's mostly nitpicking. Those ones don't last long enough to ruin the game. What really damages the experience is this freaking guy and his unnecessary, very skippable, boring dialogue. Remember Chadley? Yeah, he's back. He's back, guys. Technically, a lot of what he has to say is optional, but also not really. We'll talk about this in the gameplay section. There is a lot more good than bad in the narrative representation and the writing. There are gut-wrenching emotional punches, chuckle-inducing exchanges, and a lot of fantastic action sequences that Square-Enix has never really failed to deliver. Above all else, this game brings back that classic Final Fantasy excitement of seeing a small group of lovable characters traveling a large world together, full of breathtaking sights to see and unknown destinations to get to, gradually shaping their relationships in different ways. I don't know about you, but I miss this so much that I'm glad to have it back.
これが本当の始まりだね。う
よろしくな。
おっしゃ、行くぜ行くぜ行くぜ行くぜ。
俺の出番だな。
よし、任せよ。
了解。今だ。引き仕留める。叩き切る。
You will feel right at home with the combat coming from Rebirth right after Remake. The battle system is basically the same, in which you use every character's cost-free regular attacks and triangle bottom abilities to fight while filling their ATB gauge, which you can then use to access a menu for more impactful choices. Rebirth adds quite a few mechanics to it. The AI is still really bad at filling their own ATB, so get ready to alternate between the characters to get the job done yourself. That said, you already have more things to do at no cost of ATB, like guarding against attacks and using synergy skills. Those are quick moves you can order another character to do while you control a different character. I admit I can't really tell you how much of a game changer these are since I kept forgetting they even existed and I never played on hard mode, but they're there and you can freely customize which ones to use. As always, the material equipped on each character affects what they can do in battle, including their ATB command options. But Rebirth also made some changes to the weapon leveling system that include learning permanent new weapon abilities, Final Fantasy IX style. Those abilities become permanent options in a character's ATB menu, which greatly expands what they can do even without a proper material loadout. This is good because the game loves to force you into specific party matchups or into solo fights out of nowhere during the story, and the process of moving material between characters is incredibly tedious. Compared to the remake, and definitely compared to the original, bad material loadouts feel less like a handicap thanks to all the new mechanics. Again, I can't say how true that is for hard mode playthroughs. You start with some materials and more get unlocked through the world intel feature, which I'll talk about in a minute. Summons are really powerful, turning some difficult encounters in your favor. Of course, you will still get limit breaks, which also have a ton if you fill your limit break gauge in time, but there is another devastating resource in Rebirth called synergy abilities. You can think of them as 2 character combo limit breaks that require using a minimum amount of ATB commands to be activated. All those shiny new mechanics require managing each character's folios, meaning skill trees, to unlock. Every time a character levels up, they get more points to spend on these. Folios will also unlock higher level limit breaks and the ability to use simple elemental attacks at no cost of MP, which is very handy to pressure and stagger enemies. That's right, the stagger gauge is back yet again, but the pressure and stagger mechanic feels a lot more natural in Rebirth compared to Final Fantasy XVI. It's a way for the game to reward you for figuring out each enemy's vulnerability or know which specific attack to counter at the right time. I hated the stagger gauge in 16 and found it extremely satisfying to learn in 7 Rebirth. Your character roster is a lot bigger this time around and every character feels really different. There is always a bit of a learning curve before you master what their strengths and weaknesses are or their fighting style, but this is where the material system helps the player get comfortable, since material is a constant that doesn't really change based on the character. Once you figure out what a character is supposed to excel at, you can then come up with material loadouts that synergize well with them, if you care enough about going above and beyond. I found the combat very fun and addictive. The things I didn't like in Remake I still don't like here. Solo fights feel absolutely terrible and imbalanced when they happen, and some enemies and bosses seem to bind and trap characters a whole lot, which feels about as fun as someone randomly slapping the controller off your hands and forcing you to reach down and pick it up again. Though, some of those bind attacks can be avoided and countered to great effect. Boss fights still feature phase changes cutscenes that eat up your last chosen ATB command, and those cutscenes still can't be skipped. The combat system is mostly as deep as you want it to be, and that's a good thing. Although overall I feel even uneasy, the difficulty of some boss fights are definitely gonna stun players who are used to not using their brain much when playing JRPGs. Oh, and Classic mode is back. It still doesn't have any business being called Classic. If you like engaging with a video game, then this mode feels even worse than it did in Remake. If you don't like engaging with the combat, give it a try. In the original FF7, the areas outside of Midgar were connected by a huge road map where you would wander around and trigger random encounters, just like any old classic turn-based JRPG. Rebirth took the concept of the road map and combined it with the kind of open-area designs you've seen in a game like Xenoblade 3 or Tales of Arise. I think that was a great way to bring back that concept of a road map in a way that feels modern. The world is technically one huge connected map, but story progression dictates when the next region unlocks. So no, this is not an open world game, although for better or for worse it borrows some mechanics from that genre. Those mechanics all come into play in the Rolled Intel system. A few people either love or hate Rolled Intel, and that's for mainly two reasons. The first reason is Chadley. Chadley is back, and just like in Remake, he allows you to fight in battle simulators to unlock some materials, gain some extra experience and ability points, get more familiar with each character's playstyle, and buy some unique material. His simulator is also the only way to learn enemy skills, which I found pretty lame to be honest. Anyway, Chadley is the one who introduced you to Rolled Intel, and he's constantly calling you to over-explain things or talk your ears off about something just found in the region, or state the obvious. In later regions he's a little less obnoxious about it, but at that point you will already be skipping what he has to say whenever you can. Look, I like some elaborate lore, but trying to shove it down my throat unprompted is just annoying. The player will read everything in the Intel Codex when they feel like it anyway. And it gets worse. They added an even more annoying female counterpart. Not only does she spend half an hour describing completely useless lore for a thing you'll kill in under 5 minutes, she also constantly screams and cheers you during defeating Intel fights. I really wanna know who thought this was a good idea. Radio buddies really should be left behind with the PlayStation 3 generation. The second reason Rolled Intel is so polarizing are the objectives themselves. If you played enough Ubisoft open world games, you might be burned out on how it works. You first clear a tower off the enemies around it, then you activate the tower, which turns into a skip travel point. Icons show up in the map. Each icon is a small task you can complete for experience points and other rewards. Each task completed is more progress towards 100% intel in a region, and after the first region, you realize the tasks are extremely formulaic, busy work that gets recycled all the time. Analyze all life springs in the region, fight 3 sanctuaries and do rhythm minigames, activate all towers, defeat 6 or so unique fiends, find a Mog House and deal with the misbehaving Muggles, find a proto-relic that's split into several pieces. That's literally every region's Rolled Intel progression. Proto-relics also come paired with a series of minigames. Final Fantasy VII is no stranger to minigames. The original had many. Rebirth cranks that up to 11, with some being mandatory to progress. The quality varies a lot and so does the fun factor. But the real problem with some of the minigames, especially the Rolled Intel ones, is that they require more proficiency than they should from the player. If you go into a JRPG, odds are you're probably looking forward to the story, setting, and probably the exploration combat loop. It feels like a total curveball when suddenly the game wants you to become a good real-time strategy player in order to unlock something that will help you in the regular combat content. Nothing wrong with spicing the gameplay experience with some minigames and alternate play styles in video games, but sections like those really should be less than many of the player's ability compared to the main gameplay loop. Now, personally, I didn't hate the Rolled Intel or the designs of the regions. In spite of the minigames, Chadley and Mai, I thought the Intel objectives were a good excuse to make me spend time exploring the map. They could have had nothing at all except enemies in them, like in the original FF7, then people would complain they feature large areas with nothing to do. At the end of the day, you're exploring the map, fighting fiends and finding items. The fact the game itemizes those swings into micro-objectives shouldn't suddenly mean it's the worst gameplay ever. Besides, Intel completion gives you rewards so you don't have to spend hours grinding levels. On the downside, Intel completion gives you rewards so you don't have to spend hours grinding levels. Basically what I'm saying is, if you think you can completely ignore Road Intel and quickly beat the game, you are unfortunately very wrong. Not enjoying Road Intel might ruin some of the experience and pacing of the game because hyper-focusing on the main story will make you fall behind in level and resources to the point you will struggle with mandatory fights. This is assuming you're a player with average or below average skills. Maybe you're just really good at combat and this doesn't apply to you. Speaking from my experience, I completed Road Intel for all regions except one, and I still died about 9 or 10 times. As a JRPG player, I'm probably above average. I think everyone can at least agree running on Chocobo in these large open areas feels awesome thanks to all the extra space. Even vehicle riding from the original got brought back. Of course, just like in the original, FF7 Chocobos and vehicles can only be used in the road map. When entering villages, dungeons and non-Intel areas, you're forced to go on foot. Anyway you like Road Intel or not, movement feels pretty good for a Square-Enix game. Cloud doesn't feel like the most agile guy and he refuses to jump off cliffs more than like 3 feet tall, but the controls feel great and you can hop through a lot of objects. This extends beyond the Road Intel areas. Villages and dungeons still don't gimp your movements, and while you can't go around climbing and moving past every surface like Link in Breath of the Wild, even the most hallway of the hallways in Rebirth feels more organic than Remake's level design. Branch paths and hidden treasures are more common, and areas aren't literally 5 feet wide corridors anymore. Those areas often feature short puzzles, minigames, or some kind of a gimmick to break the pace away from just running around from point A to point B. That works well to set themselves apart from each other. I really have no complaints about the level design. Of the 100 or so very hit or miss minigames in Rebirth, there are 2 that stand out far above the rest. Chocobo Racing returns to no one's surprise, and it's a massive improvement over any other iteration of it in the franchise. It plays very much like modern Mario Kart with good intuitive controls and emphasis on drifting to build extra speed. Chocobo gear you collect can be used to affect your Chocobo's racing stats, but you get full control during the entire race, and it is very much a player skill first, stats second kind of minigame. If you don't like how Mario Kart feels for some reason, you're probably going to hate to know you have to win a mandatory race to progress in the story. Trust me, it's not a difficult minigame to learn. In fact, I think it's really baffling the second most well-designed minigame the whole game has the lowest mandatory skill floor. What is the most well-designed minigame, you ask? Well, I guess if it can count as a minigame, it's definitely Queen's Blood. The original FF7 didn't have any sort of card game, that type of thing was introduced until Final Fantasy VIII. But who cares? Queen's Blood is freaking sick. The goal is to reach the highest total score, which you do by occupying as much space in the board as you can. But there is a lot more to getting a high score than just the amount of space. Each card adds a certain amount, and some cards will have special effects applied to your own cards or the enemy's cards. It sounds complex, and it can be, but the game does a very good job making the available matches build up in difficulty in a way you can learn each layer of Queen's Blood one step at a time. You can even clear the very controversial early game tournament matches with only basic strategies. If I tried to explain Queen's Blood in detail, this video would be an hour long. In my opinion, this is the best card game Square-Enix has ever included in the games, and the level of depth and flexibility matches that of a real tabletop board game. It might seem intimidating at first, but if you take the effort to learn it, maybe after a couple hours cursing over your losses and everyone involved in the creation of the minigame like I was doing, you're really gonna enjoy beating every arrogant NPC you meet. To rethread on the topic for the minigames a little, not every minigame is terrible. Many of the minigames that are based on the original actually feel like vast improvements. like the Junon Parade and the minigames in the Gold Saucer. This is already a huge game with a lot of systems in place, even with all the more insufferable minigames that quite frankly the game would have been better without. I have to commend the developers for going through the effort of implementing them all to the best of their ability like this. I can't even pretend to care about 4K resolution or whether or not a game can go beyond 60 frames per second. I played this on 1080p displays, and because I prefer frame rate over resolution, I was running on performance mode the whole time. I noticed the frame rate drop on a few occasions, but they were so few and far between, I'm just gonna say performance mode runs fine. I'm sure there are people out there who complain about the resolution of the textures of objects, the ground, rocks, or the character's outfit or something like that. The truth is, I'm not the kind of person who cares about any of that. Unless a game is displaying 480p resolution textures, I'm not even gonna bring it up. Rebirth's graphics and performance look good. Open areas always have great visuals to see or take screenshots of, and it hits the perfect balance of movie-like realism and color, without getting too washed out or too cartoony, which fits the style of Final Fantasy VII. The setting of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, in spite of taking place in a planet getting its life energy sucked out of it, is the most stunning I've ever seen in a Square-Enix game since Final Fantasy IX. It's not constantly vibrant because not every biome is supposed to be. That contrast is also presented very well. That steampunk style world of the original Final Fantasy VII is fully realized here in a way that is only possible with the current game dev technology. When it comes to character models, the main characters look great. That realistic but stylized character design that is part of Final Fantasy's identity. Some people don't like how overly pretty everyone can look, but I think if you feel that way, you're probably playing games in the wrong series, because Final Fantasy has always gone that direction, even from the very concept art. Normally, the design of characters created by the original FF7 and Kingdom Hearts lead character designer Tetsuya Nomura are overly accessorized to the point of being a meme. But I think the designs look pretty balanced here. Every character looks the best they have ever looked. Except Rufus. His coat looks like it was rescued from a paper shredder. Now that being said, I don't think Nomura was directly responsible for the remake Rebirth designs. He probably just looked at them and gave the thumbs up. Now the visuals I definitely did not like are all the nameless NPCs. They can all be described as Ubisoft game asset flips. They don't look like they belong in the same dimension as any of the actual designed character models at all, and I'm 100% positive Square-Enix has a built-in photorealistic NPC generator they've been running since Final Fantasy XV to fill the role with these uncanny abominations. It's almost like the world of Final Fantasy VII is getting invaded by random real-world people sightseeing, taking selfies and recording TikToks. I've shown photos of Cloud and other characters standing next to some of the NPCs to people who never played Rebirth, and everyone thought it looked stupid or like Cloud got modded into an Uncharted or Far Cry game. This stylistic dissonance was already pretty bad with Final Fantasy XVI NPCs, even though they were at least dressed for the setting. It's 3 times worse in Rebirth. Coming up with quick ways to generate and populate maps with NPCs is fine and even expected in RPGs with big immersive game worlds. But Square-Enix really needs to adapt them to the visual style of their games. Until they do, I'm gonna continue to point out how awful it looks. Still, that's the only sin the game commits. Final Fantasy has always done a phenomenal job with visual effects in and out of combat. 7 Rebirth continues that trend. Combat is flashy, but not to the point of being visual polluted, and every cutscene looks fantastic. Think about any of the most memorable sights in the original. Anything that was supposed to look awe-inspiring in the original will leave you with the same impression here. If there is one thing that is not consistent about Final Fantasy games, it's gameplay. Music, on the other hand, is something they've always done really well. I wasn't super impressed with the music in Remake, and I was ready to be one of the few who wouldn't care for the soundtrack in Rebirth. Maybe it's because we're no longer stuck in Midgar, but the music direction in Rebirth is way more my style. Taking the original themes and making better instrumentation on more cinematic versions of them seems to be the focus instead of putting a bunch of weird remixes into a blender. Not every song is an earworm, but they all get the right ambience and sense of nostalgia. Some of the original tracks get different variations so they don't just get repeated with no changes unlike in the original game. The road map theme is back and plays in the road interior areas as it should, but it's rearranged or remixed based on what region you're in to fit that area's theme better. I guess my only complaint here is I like consistent general battle themes, which this game lacks. I happily take regional arrangements of the original FF7 battle theme instead of the more cinematic sounding tracks they use.
Rebirth.
綺麗だな。
でも魔法エネルギーを使い続けたらこの泉はなくなっちゃうんだよね。
誰だよ、そんなこと言ってるの。
パパ。
I didn't think Square-Enix would deliver another game worth the mainline Final Fantasy name in my lifetime anymore. 7 Rebirth so far has been my biggest positive surprise this year. The only bigger surprise is how low its saves seem to be, which only makes me want to skip to the obvious question right away. Do I recommend Final Fantasy VII Rebirth? Of freaking course I recommend it. You're all sleeping on this game. I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the closest thing to the real evolution of the classic PlayStation era Final Fantasy design in every way. If you love Final Fantasy VII, 8, 9, 10, or even 6 or 4, you owe it to yourself to play Remake and especially Rebirth. Take it from someone who is not that pleased with the first remake. I'm not so sure I can recommend it to people who aren't already Final Fantasy fans. I'm sure some people will disagree with me, but I don't think Remake or Rebirth are particularly accessible games. Even on easy mode, these are above the average difficulty in JRPGs. They're not entry points. You should be aware of this and avoid getting frustrated when you find this out the hard way. The new combat redesign was made for players who might have thought the series was getting too easy. If you play the remake and you own a PlayStation 5, do yourself a favor and get Rebirth. I guarantee you have a fantastic time. With story and characters that stay with you past the credits scene, new intriguing perspectives for every familiar character, a large, living and breathing, mostly seamless world and very engaging combat system, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth marks a true renaissance to the franchise, and I sincerely hope Square-Enix uses it as a reference for future entries, instead of being so afraid of keeping it close to the JRPG genre. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.